As the minutes ticked by, the wife's frustration turned into outright panic. Her baby's cries grew weaker, and his skin felt hotter with each passing second. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. Every instinct screamed at her to act, but she was stuck in a metal tube hurtling through the sky, miles away from any real help. The dismissive responses from the flight attendants weren't just unhelpful. They were making her feel invisible, like her concerns didn't matter. The husband, who had been sitting quietly until now, finally snapped. He'd watched as his wife pleaded for help, only to be brushed off time and again. Each casual remark from the crew members felt like another weight pressing down on them. When one attendant casually suggested that maybe the baby just needed to settle, he couldn't stay silent anymore. Standing up abruptly, he towered over the attendant, his voice low but firm. "Listen," he said, his tone cutting through the noise of the cabin. "My wife isn't asking for miracles here. We're not demanding anything extravagant. All we want is basic care. A thermometer, maybe some guidance from someone who knows what they're doing." "Is that too much to ask?" The attendant blinked, clearly caught off guard by the intensity in his voice. For a moment there was silence, the kind that makes everyone around you uncomfortable. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the attendant muttered something about checking with the captain and walked away, leaving the couple even more frustrated than before. But the husband wasn't done. He turned to face the other passengers nearby, many of whom were watching the scene unfold with growing unease. "Does anyone here know if there's a doctor or nurse on board?" he asked, raising his voice slightly so it carried across the rows. His question hung in the air, unanswered. A few people shifted awkwardly in their seats, avoiding eye contact, while others simply shook their heads. One older woman leaned forward, her expression sympathetic. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "If I could do anything, I would. But I don't think there's anyone qualified here." Her words, though kind, only added to the sinking feeling in the couple's stomachs. By this point, the tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Passengers exchanged glances, some whispering among themselves about how poorly the situation was being handled. One man seated a few rows ahead muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "This is ridiculous. If that were my kid, I'd lose my mind." The comment struck a nerve. The husband clenched his fists, struggling to keep his emotions in check. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make someone understand how desperate they were. But yelling wouldn't solve anything. It might even make things worse. Instead, he took a deep breath and tried a different approach. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his phone and opened the camera app. Holding it steady, he began recording everything: the baby's flushed cheeks, the wife's tear-streaked face, the indifferent expressions of the flight attendants hovering nearby. "In case anyone's wondering why we're upset," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him, "this is why. My son is sick, and no one seems to care." His words carried weight, not just because of their raw honesty, but because they echoed the fears of every parent in the room. What if it had been their child? How would they react if they were met with the same indifference? As the video rolled, the husband continued speaking directly into the lens. "We're hours away from landing, and these people won't even acknowledge that something might be seriously wrong. If anything happens to my baby, this airline will answer for it." The gravity of his statement hit everyone at once. Some passengers nodded in agreement, while others looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Even the flight attendants seemed to sense the shift in energy. One of them hurried over, trying to defuse the situation. "Sir, please put your phone away," she urged, her voice tinged with urgency. "You're causing a disturbance." "A disturbance?" the husband repeated, incredulous. "My baby is sick and you've done nothing to help us. That's the real disturbance here." The confrontation drew even more attention. People craned their necks to see what was happening, and murmurs rippled through the cabin. Someone farther back called out, "They should listen to him, this is serious." Another passenger chimed in, "Yeah, come on, where's the humanity?" For the first time since the ordeal began, the flight attendants appeared rattled. They huddled together near the galley, whispering urgently and casting nervous glances toward the family. One of them disappeared briefly, presumably to consult with the captain or fetch some sort of response. Meanwhile, the wife clutched her baby tighter, rocking him gently as tears streamed down her face. She didn't know whether to feel angry, scared, or both. When the head flight attendant finally returned, she carried herself with forced calmness, as if trying to project authority in a situation spiraling out of control. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, addressing the entire cabin, "we are aware of the concern regarding the infant. Rest assured we are doing everything we can to assist." Her words sounded rehearsed, almost robotic, and did little to reassure anyone. The husband crossed his arms, glaring at her skeptically. "Doing everything you can?" he echoed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What exactly does that mean? Because from where I'm standing it looks like you've done nothing." The attendant hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond. Behind her, the other crew members exchanged uneasy glances. It was obvious they hadn't anticipated the backlash their lack of action would provoke. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted entirely, from casual indifference to simmering outrage. Passengers began voicing their support for the couple. One woman stood up, holding her toddler close, and declared, "I travel with my kids all the time, and I've never seen anything like this. You need to step up and take care of them." Others nodded vigorously, adding their own complaints about the airline's handling of the situation. Despite the growing chorus of voices, the crew remained frustratingly unresponsive. No announcements were made over the intercom to seek medical assistance. No additional resources were offered. It was as if the couple's pleas had fallen into a void, swallowed whole by bureaucracy and apathy. As the argument dragged on, the wife felt a mix of emotions bubbling inside her: anger, fear, exhaustion. She glanced at her husband, who still held the phone steadily, capturing every moment of this nightmare. Part of her wanted to tell him to stop, to avoid escalating things further, but another part of her knew he was right. Someone needed to hold the airline accountable, especially when lives were potentially at stake. And so the standoff continued, each side locked in a battle of wills. The couple refused to back down, determined to fight for their baby's well-being. The crew, meanwhile, struggled to regain control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond their expectations. Little did anyone realize, this was only the beginning of a journey that would leave lasting scars, and spark a movement that would reach far beyond the confines of the airplane cabin. The tension inside the plane reached a boiling point. The husband stood firm, his phone still recording as he captured every ignored plea, every dismissive glance from the crew. Passengers around them whispered nervously, some openly siding with the couple while others simply watched in stunned silence. The wife sat clutching her baby, tears streaming down her face, her mind racing between fear for her child and disbelief at how this situation had spiraled so far out of control. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the head flight attendant returned. This time she carried a small first aid kit, holding it up like it was some kind of peace offering. "Here," she said, handing it over to the wife. "There's not much we can do, but maybe you'll find something useful here." The wife opened the kit with trembling hands. Inside she found bandages, antiseptic wipes, and a few basic supplies, nothing remotely helpful for a feverish infant. She stared at the contents, frustration bubbling over. "What am I supposed to do with this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "My baby needs help, not Band-Aids." The husband stepped in again, his tone sharp. "Are you serious right now? This is your solution? You're telling us to figure it out ourselves because you clearly don't know what to do either." His words hung heavy in the air, dripping with anger and disbelief. The flight attendant stumbled over her response, clearly unprepared for the backlash. "We've done everything we can," she insisted weakly, though her tone betrayed her guilt. "There's no doctor on board and we're following protocol." "Following protocol?" The husband shot back, incredulous. "Your protocol is letting a sick baby suffer without proper care? That's not protocol, that's negligence." By now, the entire cabin was buzzing with murmurs of disapproval. One passenger called out, "This is insane. How can they expect parents to handle this on their own? Another chimed in. If there's no doctor, why didn't they announce it earlier? Maybe someone on board has medical training. The growing chorus of voices only added fuel to the fire. Amidst the chaos, a middle-aged woman seated a few rows away stood up. She walked over to the family, her expression filled with concern. "Let me see if I can help," she said softly, kneeling beside the wife. "I'm not a doctor, but I've raised 3 kids. Sometimes babies get fevers during flights. It happens. Let me try something." She gently took the baby from the wife's arms and began checking him carefully. She pressed her hand against his forehead, noting how warm he felt. Then, she suggested loosening his clothes slightly to help cool him down. "It's not much," she admitted, "but it might make him more comfortable until we land." Though grateful for the gesture, the wife couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. Her baby's condition hadn't improved. He was still flushed, listless, and whimpering softly. Every second that passed felt like an eternity, stretching the limits of her patience and hope. As the plane continued its journey, the atmosphere remained tense. Passengers kept glancing toward the family, some offering sympathetic smiles, others looking uncomfortable at the unfolding drama. The husband paced the aisle, his phone still recording. He knew they were running out of options and time. They were hours away from landing, and every moment counted. The breaking point came when the baby let out a particularly weak cry, quieter than before. The sound sent a fresh wave of panic through the wife. She looked at her husband, her eyes wide, with terror. "What if something's really wrong?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "What if we're too late?" Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He knelt beside her, gripping her hand tightly. "We're not giving up," he said firmly, though his voice wavered slightly. "We're going to get through this, together." With renewed determination, he turned back to the flight attendants who were now huddled near the galley, whispering frantically among themselves. "Listen," he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the cabin. "You need to understand something. If anything happens to my son because of your lack of action, I will hold this airline accountable. Do you hear me? This isn't just about today. It's about making sure no family ever has to go through this again." His declaration sent shockwaves through the cabin. Some passengers clapped quietly in support, while others nodded solemnly. Even the flight attendants seemed shaken, exchanging uneasy glances. For the first time, they appeared to grasp the gravity of the situation, but despite the mounting pressure, no real solutions emerged. The crew offered vague reassurances and half-hearted apologies, but nothing substantial changed. It became painfully clear that the family was on their own, left to navigate this crisis with whatever limited resources they could muster. As the hours dragged on, the wife alternated between holding her baby close and trying to keep herself composed. She wiped away tears, took deep breaths, and focused on staying strong. For her son, for her husband, and for herself. Meanwhile, the husband kept recording, capturing every detail of their ordeal. He knew they couldn't change what was happening right now, but he was determined to ensure that this story wouldn't be forgotten once they landed. When the plane finally began its descent, relief washed over the couple. But it was tinged with lingering anxiety. They weren't out of the woods yet. As the wheels touched down, the wife held her baby tightly, praying silently that they'd made it in time. The husband grabbed their bags and ushered them off the plane as quickly as possible, heading straight for the medical team waiting at the gate. Paramedics rushed to their side, immediately assessing the baby's condition. They checked his temperature, listened to his breathing, and asked questions about his symptoms. After several tense minutes, they confirmed that the baby had a mild fever, likely caused by dehydration. A manageable issue, but one that required attention nonetheless. The diagnosis brought a mix of emotions: relief that their son would be okay, anger at how poorly the airline had handled the situation, and exhaustion from the emotional toll of the past hours. As they followed the paramedics to a nearby clinic for further evaluation, the couple shared a quiet moment of reflection. "This isn't over," the husband said firmly, his jaw set with resolve. They treated us like we didn't matter, like our baby didn't matter. We can't let them get away with that. The wife nodded, her eyes filled with tears but also with determination. "You're right," she said softly. "We have to fight for this, not just for us but for everyone else who might face the same thing." And so, even as they focused on ensuring their baby's recovery, the seeds of a larger mission began to take root. What had started as a nightmare mid-flight was about to transform into something far bigger, a crusade for accountability, justice, and change. Little did they know, their story was about to spark conversations that would reach far beyond the confines of that airplane cabin, inspiring countless others to demand better treatment and fairer standards for all travelers. Once they reached the clinic, the paramedics quickly got to work. The baby was placed on a small examination table, wrapped snugly in a soft blanket, while doctors and nurses surrounded him. They checked his temperature again, listened to his heartbeat, and ran a few quick tests to rule out anything serious. After what felt like an eternity, one of the doctors finally turned to the couple with reassuring news. Their baby was going to be okay. "It looks like mild dehydration," the doctor explained gently. "It's common for infants during long flights, especially if they aren't feeding enough. We'll give him some fluids and he should recover just fine." The words hit the wife like a wave of relief. She let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, tears streaming down her face. Not from sadness this time, but from gratitude. Her husband wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close as they both watched the medical team tend to their little boy. For the first time in hours, they allowed themselves to feel a glimmer of hope. But even as their son began to stabilize, the anger simmering beneath the surface refused to fade. The husband clenched his fists, replaying the events of the flight, over and over in his mind. He couldn't shake the image of those dismissive flight attendants or the way their concerns had been brushed aside so casually. It wasn't just about what happened. It was about how it made them feel. Invisible, powerless, and unworthy of help. By the time the baby was stable enough to leave the clinic, the couple had decided on two things. First, they needed rest. Both. For themselves and for their son. Second, they weren't going to let this incident slide. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about every family who might find themselves in a similar situation. Someone had to speak up, and they were ready to be those voices. That night, back at their hotel, the couple sat together in silence. The baby slept peacefully in his portable crib, blissfully unaware of the storm that had unfolded earlier. The wife stared at him, her heart swelling with love and protectiveness. "We almost lost him today," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What if we hadn't landed when we did?" Her husband didn't respond immediately. Instead, he picked up his phone and opened the video footage he'd recorded during the flight. As he watched the clips, his jaw tightened. There was no denying it. The airline's staff had failed them. And not only that, they'd done so in a way that felt deeply personal, as though their pleas for help had been met with indifference because of who they were. "I'm not letting this go," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "This isn't just about us getting justice, it's bigger than that. We need to make sure no other family has to go through this." With that resolve burning inside him, he started drafting an email. It wasn't just any email. It was addressed directly to the airline's corporate office. In painstaking detail, he recounted everything that had happened. The rising fever, the ignored requests for help, the dismissive responses from the crew. He attached timestamps from the video footage, capturing each moment of neglect and frustration. By the time he finished typing, the email was several paragraphs long, filled with raw emotion and undeniable proof of the airline's failure. Before hitting send, he paused, rereading the message multiple times. Then he leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. Something inside him told him this story needed to reach more people. If the airline wouldn't listen, maybe the public would. Early the next morning, the husband logged into his social media account. He uploaded the video clips along with a written post explaining their ordeal. He titled it simply, "When Help Was Denied Mid-Flight." Within minutes, the post gained traction. Friends and followers shared it, adding their own comments of outrage and support. Strangers chimed in too, sharing their own stories of discrimination and neglect during air travel. The response was overwhelming and fast. Within hours, the post went viral, spreading across platforms like wildfire. News outlets picked up the story, reaching out to the couple for interviews. One journalist asked bluntly, "Do you think race played a role in how you were treated?" The question hung heavily in the air, forcing the couple to confront something they'd suspected all along but hadn't wanted to admit. "Honestly, I don't know," the husband replied after a pause. "But I do know this. If we'd been treated differently, if our concerns had been taken seriously, things could have ended very differently for our son. And that's unacceptable." His words resonated deeply with viewers, sparking conversations about bias and inequality in the aviation industry. People began using hashtags like #FlyWithCare and accountability in air travel, amplifying the couple's call for change. Corporate sponsors of the airline started distancing themselves, citing reputational risks. Investors grew nervous, and shareholders demanded answers. Under mounting pressure, the airline issued a public apology. It was carefully worded, full of promises to improve customer service and address systemic issues. But the couple saw right through it. To them, it felt hollow, a PR move designed to save face rather than enact real change. During a live TV interview later that week, the husband addressed the apology head-on. "Words are easy," he said, looking straight into the camera. "Anyone can say sorry, but actions matter more. Until this airline proves they value every passenger equally, regardless of race, gender, or background, I won't trust them, and neither should you." Then came the bombshell. Earlier that year, the husband's tech startup, a promising company developing innovative software solutions, had entered negotiations with the same airline for a major partnership deal worth millions. The collaboration would have been a game changer for his business, opening doors to new opportunities and growth. But now, sitting in front of millions of viewers, he made a bold announcement. "I'm pulling the plug on those talks. My family's safety and dignity are non-negotiable. Until this airline shows they're committed to meaningful change, we won't do business with them." The statement sent shockwaves through the corporate world. Analysts debated the financial implications, while supporters praised the husband for standing by his principles. Social media erupted with messages of admiration, calling him a hero for prioritizing integrity over profit. Investors took notice too, recognizing the power of ethical leadership in today's climate. Meanwhile, the airline scrambled to salvage its reputation. They launched diversity training programs for employees, revised customer service protocols, and promised transparency moving forward. While these steps were commendable, the couple remained skeptical. Change, they knew, wouldn't happen overnight. It required consistent effort, accountability, and a genuine willingness to listen. As the days passed, the couple found themselves thrust into the spotlight, becoming symbols of resilience and advocacy. They received countless messages from strangers, thanking them for speaking out, sharing their own experiences of mistreatment during travel. Each story reinforced their belief that this fight was bigger than them. It was about creating a safer, fairer system for everyone. Though exhausted from the whirlwind of attention, the couple refused to back down. Their vacation may have been derailed, but their mission was just beginning. Little did they know, their decision to share their story would inspire a movement, one that would challenge industries, spark dialogue, and push for lasting change. The couple returned home from their trip with mixed emotions. On one hand, they were relieved that their baby was healthy and safe. The doctors had assured them that the dehydration was mild and easily treatable, and after a few days of rest and proper care, their little one was back to his playful self. But on the other hand, the sting of what happened on that flight lingered like an open wound. It wasn't just about the airline's failure, it was about how it made them feel. Dismissed, disrespected, and dehumanized. Back in their Chicago apartment, life slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be. The wife spent her days caring for their baby, but her mind often drifted back to that moment mid-flight when she felt utterly powerless. She replayed the scenes over and over again in her head, the dismissive shrugs of the flight attendants, the indifference in their voices, the way no one seemed willing to take their concerns seriously. Each memory reignited the anger and frustration she'd felt on the plane. Her husband, meanwhile, couldn't stop thinking about the broader implications of their experience. He knew they weren't the first family to face neglect during travel, and sadly, they wouldn't be the last. What struck him most was how systemic the problem seemed to be. It wasn't just one bad crew or one isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of bias and neglect that affected countless travelers, particularly those from marginalized communities. One evening, as they sat together on the couch watching their baby crawl around the living room, the husband turned to his wife and said, "We can't let this go. Not yet." She looked at him, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean? We've already shared our story. Isn't that enough?" "It's a start," he replied firmly. "But sharing our story is only step one. If we really want to make a difference, we need to keep pushing for real change, not just empty promises." His words resonated deeply with her. They both knew they had a choice: move on and try to forget what happened, or use their experience as a catalyst for something bigger. Neither of them hesitated. They chose to fight. The next morning, the husband began researching organizations focused on advocating for fair treatment in the aviation industry. To his surprise, there weren't many dedicated specifically to addressing racial bias and discrimination during air travel. Most groups focused on general passenger rights, which was important but didn't tackle the deeper issues they wanted to address. That's when inspiration struck. "What if we started our own organization?" he asked his wife later that day. "Something that focuses on holding airlines accountable and educating people about their rights while traveling." At first, the idea seemed overwhelming. Starting a nonprofit wasn't easy. It required time, money, and endless energy. But the more they talked about it, the more it made sense. Their experience had given them a unique platform, and they were determined to use it for good. They decided to call their organization Fly Equally. The name was simple but powerful, reflecting their mission to ensure every traveler, regardless of race, gender, or background, was treated with dignity and respect. Their goal was threefold: to raise awareness about discrimination in the aviation industry, to push for policy changes within airlines, and to provide resources for passengers who encountered similar situations. To get things off the ground, the Guillaume couple reached out to friends, family, and even strangers who had supported their story online. Many offered to help, whether by volunteering their skills, donating funds, or simply spreading the word. One friend, a graphic designer, helped create a logo for Fly Equally, while another, a marketing expert, offered advice on how to build a strong social media presence. Slowly but surely, the pieces began falling into place. Their first big initiative was hosting workshops in local community centers. These sessions were designed to educate travelers about their rights and empower them to speak up if they faced unfair treatment. The couple shared their own story openly, using it as a starting point for discussions about bias and accountability. Attendees listened intently, nodding along as they described their ordeal and explained why action was necessary. One attendee, a young mother named Lisa, approached them after a workshop with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for doing this," she said softly. "I've been treated poorly on flights before too, but I never knew where to turn. Hearing your story makes me feel less alone." Moments like these reminded the couple why they were fighting so hard. Every person who attended their workshops, every message of support they received online, reinforced the importance of their mission. They weren't just advocating for themselves, they were giving a voice to countless others who had been silenced. So, word spread, Fly Equally gained traction beyond their local community. News outlets covered their efforts, highlighting their advocacy work and interviewing them about their vision for the future. The couple appeared on talk shows, wrote op-eds for major publications, and spoke at conferences about systemic inequality in the aviation industry. Their message resonated with audiences nationwide, sparking conversations and inspiring action. Airlines began taking notice, too. Some reached out to collaborate, eager to improve their policies and demonstrate a commitment to fairness. Others remained resistant, viewing the couple's efforts as a threat to their bottom line. But the couple refused to back down. They knew change wouldn't happen overnight, but they also knew persistence was key. One of their proudest achievements came when FlyEqually partnered with a major airline to develop diversity training programs for employees. The program included modules on recognizing unconscious bias, improving customer service for all passengers, and creating protocols for handling medical emergencies on board. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction, a tangible example of how advocacy could lead to meaningful progress. Despite their growing success, the couple stayed grounded. They never lost sight of why they started FlyEqually in the first place: their son. Every decision they made, every initiative they launched, was driven by the desire to create a better world for him and children like him. They envisioned a future where no parent would have to endure what they went through, a future where everyone could travel safely and with dignity. Though the road ahead was long, the couple felt hopeful. They had transformed a painful experience into a powerful movement, proving that even in the face of adversity, resilience and determination could spark change. And as they watched their baby laugh and play, blissfully unaware of the impact he'd inspired, they knew their fight was far from over, but it was worth every step. Months turned into a year, and the couple's lives had transformed in ways they never imagined. What started as a nightmare mid-flight had evolved into a journey of purpose and resilience. Their advocacy work with FlyEqually wasn't just a project. It had become their mission, their passion, and their way of giving back to a world that often felt unfair. But it wasn't always easy. There were days when the weight of their fight felt overwhelming, when the uphill battle against systemic issues seemed insurmountable. Yet every time they saw the impact of their efforts, they knew they were on the right path. One evening, sitting at their kitchen table surrounded by stacks of papers, emails, and planning documents, the husband leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You know," he said, glancing over at his wife, "I never thought we'd be doing this. When we got on that plane, all I wanted was a relaxing vacation. Now look at us." She smiled softly, cradling a cup of tea in her hands. "Yeah, but think about how far we've come. We're actually making a difference." And they were. Over the past year, FlyEqually had grown from a small grassroots effort into a nationwide movement. Their workshops had expanded beyond Chicago, reaching cities across the country. They partnered with schools, community organizations, and even government agencies to spread awareness about discrimination in the aviation industry. Thousands of people attended their events, many sharing their own stories of mistreatment during travel. Each story added fuel to their fire, reminding them why their work mattered. But perhaps the most rewarding aspect of their journey was seeing the tangible changes they inspired. Airlines that once ignored complaints now actively sought feedback from passengers. Policies were rewritten to prioritize inclusivity and accountability. Some carriers even implemented new training programs for staff, focusing on cultural sensitivity and emergency response protocols. The couple took pride in knowing their voice had helped push these changes forward. Their son, now a lively toddler, was growing up fast. He toddled around the house, giggling as he chased after toys or tried to climb onto the couch unassisted. Watching him play, the couple couldn't help but reflect on how much his presence had shaped their lives. It was his vulnerability on that flight that had sparked their fight, and it was his future that kept them motivated. Every decision they made, every late night spent strategizing or drafting proposals, was done with him in mind. "He has no idea what he started, does he?" the wife joked one afternoon, watching as he babbled happily to himself while stacking blocks. The husband chuckled. "Nope. And maybe that's a good thing. Hopefully, by the time he's old enough to understand, the world will be a better place for him to grow up in." Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. Not everyone supported their efforts. Critics accused them of being too harsh on airlines, claiming they should let things go and focus on the positives. Others dismissed their work as unnecessary, arguing that incidents like theirs were rare exceptions rather than part of a larger pattern. At times, the negativity weighed heavily on them, making them question whether their fight was worth it. But then something would happen. A message from a grateful passenger, a story of someone who stood up for themselves because of Fly Equally's workshops, or even a simple thank you note from a stranger that reminded them why they kept going. One letter in particular stood out. It came from an older woman who had traveled extensively throughout her life but always felt hesitant to speak up when treated poorly. After attending one of their workshops, she decided to file a formal complaint with an airline following a discriminatory encounter. Her courage paid off. The airline not only apologized but also compensated her for the incident. "I never thought I could make a difference," she wrote in her letter. "But hearing your story gave me the strength to try. Thank you for showing me that my voice matters." Reading those words brought tears to both their eyes. It was moments like these that made all the hard work worthwhile. As their influence grew, so did the recognition they received. Awards began pouring in. Local community honors, national accolades, and even invitations to speak at prestigious conferences. One particularly memorable moment came when they were invited to address a room full of aviation executives at a global summit. Standing on stage, looking out at the sea of suits, the husband felt a mix of nerves and determination. "This isn't about blame," he said, his voice steady but powerful. "It's about responsibility. Every passenger deserves to feel safe and respected when they board a plane. If we can learn anything from our experience, it's that silence is complicity. Change won't happen unless we demand it and hold each other accountable." His speech earned a standing ovation, and afterward several executives approached them to discuss potential collaborations. While they remained cautious, knowing talk didn't always translate to action, they welcomed the opportunity to keep pushing for progress. At home, life continued to balance between advocacy and family. The couple made sure to carve out time for themselves and their son, recognizing the importance of staying grounded amidst the chaos. Weekends were reserved for park visits, lazy mornings, and quiet evenings together. These moments served as a reminder of what truly mattered: love, connection, and the hope for a brighter future. Looking ahead, they knew the fight was far from over. Discrimination and bias wouldn't disappear overnight, and there would always be more work to do. But they also knew they weren't alone. A growing network of supporters, allies, and advocates stood beside them, united in their quest for fairness and equality. On a sunny Saturday morning, as their son played in the backyard, chasing butterflies and laughing uncontrollably, the couple sat side by side on the porch steps. The husband wrapped an arm around his wife, pulling her close. "We've come a long way," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on their child. "But we're not done yet." She nodded, leaning into him. "No, we're not. But as long as we're doing this together for him, I think we'll be okay." In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of family and the promise of change, they allowed themselves to feel a sense of peace. Their journey had been anything but easy, but it had taught them the power of resilience, the importance of speaking up, and the incredible impact one family could have when they refused to stay silent. And those scars from that fateful flight remained. They carried them not as burdens but as reminders of the strength they found within themselves and the world they were helping to build for the next generation.